2 years on from the VW scandal and the motor industry is still in a spin. Policymakers around the world are focusing on the health effects of nitrous oxide in diesel emissions. Now the media are pounding on diesel with doom stories that have frankly left consumers very concerned and the motor industry wondering about its future. Manufacturers have rushed to market with low emission vehicles, but the infrastructure needed to support them remains inadequate. There aren't enough charging points, nor are there enough technicians qualified to service ULEVs once they're on the road. So I asked IMI boss Steve Nash, is diesel really dead in the water?
I really don't think the status of diesel cars as presented in the media is justified for the very reason that we've got a certain sort of hysteria around the whole thing. I think we all accept, the industry accepts that there are emission problems, but that is not all about diesel cars, and it certainly isn't about the most modern diesel cars. A lot has been done to clean up diesel's act. I think so a modern EU6 standard diesel is a considerably cleaner car than say a pre-2005 car would be. Not only that, but we have new stricter emissions tests coming in September. That means that cars will get proper on the road testing. And I just think we have to be very careful that from a governmental point of view that we don't see the baby thrown out with the bathwater, because diesel still does have advantages. 15 to 20% more efficient than a petrol car, so that means less CO2, and that's still a consideration. It's the reason people, we were recommended to take diesel cars in the first place. But also for people who are doing long distances, a lot of motorway miles, it's still probably the best choice.
Steve's nuanced view hasn't really figured in tabloid news stories, and as a result, local and national politicians have rushed out to pledge punishments to persuade people not to drive diesels. Plans for bans, fines and parking restrictions abound, but there's not much else. Steve Nash says we need more incentives to persuade drivers to make the switch to green cars.
What I think the government needs to do, and to be even-handed and sensible with customers, who bear in mind, that it was government, and it doesn't really matter what colour the government was, it was government that recommended people go towards diesel and incentivised people to go towards diesel. They have to look at the thing sensibly and say, look, all diesels are not the same. There's a big difference between a car coming off the production line today and one that might have come off 10 years ago, and they need to act accordingly. Rather than legislating against all diesel, they need to they need to look at the modern ones differently. And I think what we need to see is a bit more carrot and a little less stick. So most of the policies that have been mooted have all been about, it's policy by electric fence. Don't do this, go there and you'll get fined for this, or you'll get an extra, you'll have to make extra payments for that. We need some genuine incentives. So and it's particularly pertinent for people, lower income people with older cars. They don't have the money to go out and buy themselves an electric or a plug-in hybrid car, so that there needs to be a sensible transition.
Sadiq Khan is shaking the stick at diesel, and for good reason. 10,000 people die every year in London because of polluted air. But does the mayor have any carrots in his bag?
I think what we've seen, and this is a really important point these days, is that without central government acting, the devolved administrations will take things upon themselves. As of next year, from 2018, any London cabbie wanting to buy a new cab has to buy the new sort of electric hybrid cab, and then by 2020 they've all got to go that way. Now that was Boris Johnson who initiated that. That wasn't central government. Sadiq Khan in London has got many other ideas of his own that he's talked about. He's talked about toxin taxes. Nobody quite knows what that is yet, but it's a tax, doubling parking costs for people with diesels, and there's no reason why the mayor of Manchester couldn't do the same thing. And those things are fine, but those guys don't actually have the wherewithal to give incentives. They can only give disincentives. And there's a real danger that you'll have a piecemeal approach around the country. What you really need is strong direction from central government. So, in his new role as Environment Minister, Michael Gove really needs to grab hold of this. It's not him alone, but certainly he'll play a big part in this.
So what do national politicians think about the diesel situation? We asked Richard Burden MP, automotive champion and good friend of the IMI. He's been watching the diesel situation develop with some concern.
Well, there is no question at all that the government, whoever is in power, needs to treat the air quality crisis seriously. 40,000 preventable deaths every year. Now, I think there is no doubt that, diesel, particularly older diesels, have contributed a lot to that. The industry has to acknowledge that, and failure to do that, or appearing to attempt to get around the problem or duck it, as you saw with the Volkswagen scandal, really does nobody any good at all. It muddies the debate around diesel, and actually it creates a suspicion around the industry, which for a great many manufacturers is unfair, but it's real. So I think what's important is there is an informed debate here about what contribution road transport makes to air quality problems and how that can be addressed. I mean, part of that has got to acknowledge the problems around diesel, but also needs to be acknowledged that diesels of Euro 6 and moving on from Euro 6 are a great deal cleaner than older diesels. So getting that differentiation is important as well.
Finally, Steve Nash has got a clear message for ministers. Get your act together over diesel.
My message to the key government ministers like Michael Gove, Chris Grayling, the business secretary, is those guys need to work together, and they need to lay out a very clear pathway. Our industry desperately needs it. We don't need just lots and lots of threats of things that might happen. We need to know what is going to happen so that we can plan. And that means that, I think the whole industry is united behind the view that we shouldn't murder diesel. We understand, manufacturers are doing a great deal to bring plug-in hybrids and other and electric cars and to the market, and that's great. But there is still a place right now today. I know of people who are confused about what to buy, because actually the sensible thing for them to buy is a diesel or perhaps a petrol car, but they're feeling driven towards buying something different because of all these kind of threats that are in the air. So we need clarity on that. We need to understand the role of all these different sort of modes of transport, but fundamentally it must be clear guidance from the government, and they need to recognise that, actually sort of get off the soapbox a little bit and recognise that actually if we all kind of followed their implied advice and went out and bought an electric or a plug-in hybrid car tomorrow, the national grid would fall over. Again, it's all part of taking some of that huge amount of money they've got, 600, I think it was initially 600 million, I think it's more like 800 million now, of which they've only committed 35 million to put some new charging points in. Spend some of that money to do something really constructive behind a meaningful policy, and give our industry some clear guidelines.
Well, there you go. If you'd like the government to make its policy on diesel and the future of automotive technology clearer, then please share this film with your MP and even the Secretary of State for Transport. We'll see you again soon.